Stage 1, pressing for flight. Launch reactor on countdown 1. We are go for launch.
Yes, sir. Reading you loud and clear. Clear. The clock has started.
The clock has started.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Welcome to Pressing for Flight, live from the Space Coast, where the schedule never holds. I am your host, Stephen Marr, and joining me tonight we have, to my left, Mr. Stephen Kegel.
Hi, I'm here again.
To his left, Mr. Matt Cutshaw.
What's going on? A little bit of a cough, just a smidgen.
Still holding on.
Brown legal. It's holding on just a smidgen. It's like we're gonna give you maybe another day or so, and then you'll be cough free.
And
Corona light.
what? Corona. And Miss Becca Penland. How we
Hello.
doing?
I'm fantastic.
And joining us tonight, I have been looking forward to this show for a very long time. We have the assistant managing editor, journalist, writer for NASA Spaceflight, and, little known fact, script writer, Chris G. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. It's great to be here. How are you
Thank you
guys?
for coming, man. Thank you so much for coming. Well, okay, so I have been following you for a long time. You've always been like the go-to like space info. You know, if Chris G says it, then you know that it's true. So, but you've been in the game for a long time. Like when? Okay, so when did you start reporting on space stuff? And I honestly don't know. Did you like go to college for reporting, or like start us from the beginning?
Yeah, so those two questions are wonderfully related. I did not go to college for journalism or anything like that. I actually have 2 degrees in English composition and rhetoric and American cultural studies.
Okay.
And it was my sophomore year of college. I was up late, as you do in college.
Yeah.
And I was on NASA Spaceflight, and I was just kind of clicking on links. I was like delving into like L2 and all of these like informational pages that were on the website back then.
Mm-hmm.
And I just kind of kept clicking links, and I eventually clicked one that brought me. So this was in 2008, February of 2008.
Okay.
And it brought me to the original homepage for NASA Spaceflight from March or April of 2004, announcing the site and return, and return to flight initiatives after the Columbia accident. And on that front page, there was, that Chris Bergen had written. There was this message that was basically putting out the call for reporters or writers to cover the shuttle program or the International Space Station, or at that point, it was called Project Constellation.
Right.
The rocket looks nearly identical
And the
today.
Ares rocket, wasn't it?
It was the Ares rocket, yes. And Ares 4 is just basically SLS now. They just gave it a new paint job and slapped a new name on it.
Yeah.
Basically the same thing. And so I took a shot and messaged him because I had noticed, even in 2008, that he was the only one writing articles for the site.
Mm-hmm.
And messaged him, and he wrote back almost instantly. And the first thing he said was, "I don't know how you found that homepage. Didn't know it was still live." And I was not in Wayback Machine either.
Right. Okay.
But he's like, "But in 4 years, you are the first person to ask if I needed a writer and use completely spelled out words and sentences."
Oh, really? Like people doing that
Really?
that like AOL chat shorthand, like you are.
Yes.
And
Yes, exactly. Are you looking for a shuttle writer?
They're probably typing on their old cell phone.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God! Predictive T9 predictive text. Like hit the 7 button 4 times.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh wow, we just dated ourselves.
Yeah, I know.
As badly as we did in the conversation before we went on air. Though.
Right. Yeah, I remember when I got my first iPhone, I was like, "Oh no, I'm not going to be able to text and drive anymore." Right? Because you couldn't feel the buttons, right?
Right. So he gave me a test article to write. I remember exactly what it was. It was about the plan that the Endeavour flight, STS-123, was going to leave the orbiter boom sensor system arm behind on the station, because the following flight of Discovery 124, which was launching the huge Japanese Kibo laboratory, which was designed and built before the Columbia accident, was too big to fit in the payload bay if they had the orbiter boom sensor system on Discovery.
Okay.
So they had to leave it. So they had to leave Endeavours behind so Discovery could go up without it and then grab it and do all the inspections. So he sent me this PDF and said, turn it around, into an article. And I did. And you have to picture a really thick Yorkshire accent saying this.
Okay.
And he responded, "Holy bananas, you can write."
Oh, nice.
And but again, you have to picture the really thick Yorkshire accent with that.
Are you afraid he might hear you? Do it. Do the accent. Come on.
Do the accent. No, in fact, when I met him in England, when I was in England a few years ago, and I met him, I recounted that to him, and he said, like, "Wow, I don't remember that." And I was like, "Well, I do." Like, it was pretty. And it was, that's how I got started. In college, not, going to school for that stuff, but I had always been a fan of space exploration. I grew up in a city just south of Daytona Beach, about 50 miles north of Cape Canaveral and the Kennedy Space Center. We could walk into our backyard and watch the old Atlases and Titans and Deltas launch. My dad was a huge fan of space exploration. The first launch he ever saw was Apollo 11 with his own eyes. After his family moved to Florida, and human space exploration was just something that fascinated him. And I don't remember a lot of them. I used to have a photo, which I very sadly lost in a move, but it was, my mom took it and my dad was holding me in his arms. And we're standing on the river in Titusville, and by the date on the photograph, it's STS-26 and the return to flight after Challenger.
Oh, wow.
And I was 10 months old. So technically I saw every shuttle launch after the Challenger disaster, but the first one I remember, and it's actually one of my first memories, is Endeavour's maiden flight in 92.
Right.
Nice.
So that was, the space program was always a huge part of my upbringing and my life, as with Star Trek, which I know we want to get to later.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, but yeah, that's how I kind of got my start.
So a lot of times, people grow up around something, but they don't necessarily, it doesn't like pull them in, and it doesn't necessarily become their life. But what is it about space where you wanted that to just be everything that you ever thought about?
Well, it's a good question. I don't really know if I have an answer for that. Because I can totally relate to the thing you grow up around that you just have no interest. Like, I have no interest in the beach or surfing.
Okay.
I grew up a mile from the ocean in one of the surf capitals of the world.
Right.
I just have no interest in it. So I get that element of like the things that you're sort of saturated with growing up are usually the things you step away from.
Yeah. I've met a lot of people around here that grew up around here, and they're just not that interested in the space stuff. But
yeah. But it was, I don't know. It was always just this cool thing. Like, it took me a long time. This isn't really an answer to your question, but I think it kind of just is for me. Like, it took me a long time to realize that the vast majority of the world, like 99.9% of the world, cannot walk out into their backyard and watch a rocket go to space.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It was just always cool to me. Like, I was introduced and Star Trek was ingrained in me actually before I was born. Because my mom was bedridden, or on bed rest, I should say, the last trimester. And the thing she watched was the first season of Next Generation and old reruns of the original series. And she told me much later on that she used to joke with my dad that, I'm quoting here, that if I didn't come out humming the theme song, something was wrong. So I don't know. Like, I mean, I think Star Trek had a lot to do with it because there was the science fiction element of it, but then being able to grow up literally in the shadow of the vehicle assembly building and the shuttle program and everything, and they just sort of clicked.
Yeah, that's cool. I can understand that.
Yeah.
What's your favorite Star Trek episode?
Oh God, episode. Deep Space Nine, season 6, In the Pale Moonlight.
Oh man, I thought like that was gonna be a joke. Like you know, you're just gonna spout some random episode number. Wow.
Well, no, very specific. No, it's the one where where the whole episode is framed around Cisco addressing the camera and the audience. It's the one time that Star Trek actually breaks the fourth wall. And he's talking about the whole episode is him trying to reconcile having to do something illegal, incredibly immoral, and be an accomplice to a murder of an innocent person because it would bring another ally into the war against the Dominion on the Federation side and give them the chance to win. And it's an incredible hour of television, even to this day.
Cool. I sadly never watched Deep Space Nine. Just the original. I just watched the original. Well, but I watched all the originals. Come on, The Trouble with Tribbles.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
It's honestly just the only one I actually know the name of. But there's a lot of great episodes in the original. I actually for a long time that the original series was what I would pull up on Netflix. You know, whenever I'm winding down to go to sleep. I fell asleep to a lot of Star Trek. You know, did the same thing with Cosmos and. That sort of thing.
When they remastered the original series over a decade ago, I remember being very skeptical about that because I'm like, oh no, like the nostalgia is like the old, really bad special effects and everything like that. And I was watching the episode, the arena where Kirk fights the Gorn, and I'm in my dorm room. I'm a freshman in college, and I'm in my dorm room. It's like a Saturday at like 4:00 in the afternoon, and I'm watching Star Trek: The Original Series. So there's an insight like into what I was like in college.
Right.
Life of the party. And
you want to go out, Chris? Nah, man. I'll be in here watching. Star
there's
Trek.
the Star Trek episode that like aired 35 years ago. And but anyway, the point of this, before like really delving into how much of a nerd I am, was the Gorn blinks in the remastered, and I scared the shit out of my roommate when it happened because I just jumped out of bed and went, "Oh my god, it blinked! Like that's so cool!"
That's Blunk. Funny. Is that real? Is that past tense?
Blunk?
Of Blink. That's awesome.
It should be. If it isn't,
if it isn't, I don't know. Sometimes I just make up words. They sound good.
Yeah, I like it. Okay, so I warned you that I had just had jotted down a bunch of stuff that I wanted to kind of get your take on. But before we started, we were talking about the SAOCOM launch and how cool that's going to be, and we were talking about how. Or I was saying how I might just go ahead and walk out to the beach from where I live, and because typically I'll like go somewhere else and try to get some kind of interesting shot from some perspective. But it's coming right up over our heads, and then we got a rising response out of Becca because she didn't know that. So it's going to happen at sunset, right? And yeah, we were going to talk about why it is, no matter what day it is, it's going to be at sunset, right? So it's a sun synchronous orbit. So fire away. Explain sun synchronous to us.
So sun synchronous, it big fancy term, but it's kind of exactly as the name implies. It just means that the satellite will pass over the same exact point on Earth at the same local solar time each day.
Right.
So. And the trick with SAOCOM, right? And you can launch them at any time of day. Like they don't have to be launched at at sunset.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Okay.
But the trick with SAOCOM 1B is that it has a twin. It has SAOCOM 1A, which launched a year and a half ago on a Falcon 9 from Vandenberg.
Mm-hmm.
So they're kind of tied together. They're two Argentinian Earth observation satellites.
Okay.
So they're just kind of timed together, which is what gives us our more or less sunset launch time. Because the mission is actually launching at 7:21 p.m. on the 30th of March. Is what the current is what it's currently timed for. And sunset on that day, if I can correctly type the word March into the computer here, is 18 minutes later at 7:39, right? So it's kind of timed to get it into the sun synchronous orbit right at the sunset period. Right. So and the other one was a morning launch, so it's on that sunrise time of the past.
Do they like angle their orbit so that they pretty much follow the Terminator around the Earth?
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Okay. So,
and the cool thing about sun synchronous orbits is that they're technically retrograde. They're just ever so slightly retrograde, so that you get that same.
Because as the Earth is orbiting the sun, where that Terminator lines up and what time of day, that's going to be at a different. Right. Okay.
Exactly. Exactly.
Terminator is. Are you pulling out the horse? Thank you. That's the.
There's the horse.
To chime in with a question. Yes.
In light of recent film series that I've seen, I'm really going to need you to explain that to me. What is the Terminator?
It's the T2.
It's
in science fiction or reality?
It's the divider line between day and night. So like if you look up at the moon and you see there's the light part and then there's the dark part, that line right at the line between the light and dark, that's called the Terminator. So on the Earth, we're talking about this orbit. These satellites, their orbit is set in such a way that they basically orbit directly over. So if you were standing on that satellite looking down, you'd be to your left, you'd see light, and to the right, you'd see dark, or vice versa. Right? Is that right? And you'd actually see some really cool stuff because along the term, that's where you get all those long lines from the clouds and like mountains and stuff. If you've ever seen pictures from the space station that are taken along the Terminator, they're just real cool.
Yeah. And you can get some interesting things like in morning when the atmospheric distortion is much less because of the calming effects of the cooler temperatures at night versus the atmospheric distortion at the Terminator at sunset, right? When you've had all this daytime heating and convection in the atmosphere and everything like that. Like you can get some really important observations about how ecosystems and land masses and everything react at, and change.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. I want to go to space. Oh, how about this? Do you want to go to space?
Yes.
Okay. Who do you
I'm sorry, that's a question?
I mean, I know, but there are people that are into this stuff that are like, no. I like space, but I don't want to go there.
Oh, no, I get on a rocket and go.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. So do you think maybe people like us, our best bet is maybe holding out for Starship and Earth-to-Earth transportation and maybe just saving up enough to pay that ticket? That might be the best bet because Virgin Galactic, $250,000, Blue Origin, big old question mark. We don't know.
Well, and Elon said, what was this, 2017, I think, when they first started talking about Earth point-to-point, that he said, like, the goal is to get it to be the price of a domestic airline ticket.
First class, right? Did he say first class or did he just say...
I don't know if he said a class. I thought he just kind of said the price of a domestic ticket.
Okay.
But I don't know. But I mean, especially like what we're talking about with like Virgin Galactic, and we don't know Blue Origin's price point yet. But I mean, like we're talking like $200,000, $250,000 for those. Yeah. I mean, my God, like even $1,000 if it was the price of a first class ticket.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Still
I mean
totally,
that's a hell of a
yeah.
lot more affordable. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, like,
Are you holding any Virgin Galactic stock?
I am not. No,
Oh, you should. I got in on like
I
day
should,
2.
but there's a conflict of interest there if I would.
Really?
So I'm
Oh,
not.
okay. I just figured like it's like
Reporting on them and holding stock in them. Yeah, that's a bit of a conflict of interest.
Yeah, I guess so. I didn't think about that. I just figured like there's not many space companies that you can invest in like that, you know? And I was like,
True.
okay, well, Virgin
True.
Galactic, they're coming in at like $10 a share. So I was like, well, I'm going to buy some and just see what happens. You know, you're not losing much.
I mean, it couldn't have been a bad buy. Like,
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so I want to talk about Starlink because almost every time we talk about Starlink, I end up talking about the controversy surrounding Starlink. You know, we've got all these launches. It seems like we're launching Starlink like every other week, which is what they said they were going to do. They're pretty close to pulling that off, the every other week thing.
I mean, we had 2 in January. We had 1 in February, and we'll have another one coming up in March. So yeah, pretty close. Yeah,
we're getting pretty close. Obviously, you know, a lot of us are interested in the service, you know, getting Starlink service,
Mhm.
you know, ditching cable if it's affordable. I'd even pay a little bit more if, you know, just to be able to ditch cable and get Starlink. But what about the astronomers? Like, I'm totally into astronomy too, and I don't want them to not be able to do their science. You know, where do you come down on it, or do you have like a firm opinion on you know, where this is going, and if they're going to figure out a way to kind of get along?
I mean, I think they're going to figure out a way to get along because I mean that Starlink train has kind of left the station.
It's going
At this point. I mean, I know there was like this weird last ditch. I say last ditch from like the astronomers or the people in the astronomy community who are on the side of no more Starlink should ever be allowed to launch.
Yeah.
Tried this lawsuit, right, to try to compel a federal judge to put an injunction on launching Starlink, and that obviously went nowhere.
Okay.
No, you know, like here's honestly where I come down from it. You know, like there's, you know, we always hear the big, you know, the big talking points every 14 days or so when a new batch of Starlinks are launched.
Mhm.
And they're injected into their really low orbit. They're in elliptical orbits now,
And they're
you know,
all right next to each other.
And they're right next to each other. They're very low in the sky. And the critical part that I think that keeps getting overlooked, right, is that they're oriented in their checkout orientation, not their operational orientation, right? So they're oriented after launch and for the first couple of weeks in these not operational orientations that force that reflective side, right, to reflect a lot of that light that they're catching.
Okay, yeah.
Down at the ground. But then how much of it do you hear today after the last Starlink launch, which was what, 10 days ago?
Oh, man, I lose track. Yeah, it was
Sorry, the 10 days ago wasn't actually the important part.
Yeah, right.
You know, a week or 2 after launch, when they're spread out and their orbits are raised,
Mhm.
how much do we keep hearing about them?
Nothing.
How many cool videos do we get of them going through the sky?
Well, it was a lot on the first couple, and it's kind of less and less, you know.
Right. So where I'm kind of coming down on this is like, yeah, I mean, like, and granted, we're only talking about 362 of them or something like that, at 342 or something like that at this point that are up there.
Mhm.
So, and granted, that's a drop in the bucket compared to the 1,500 for initial operation and up to 12,000 or 42,000, you know, depending on need and demand. But, you know, there's got to be a happy medium here, right? And it's not like SpaceX didn't see the problem when it was launched. It's not like astronomers didn't know Starlinks were going to be launched, right? And after that first test flight in May, right, there were a lot of really respected astronomers who stood up and said, wait a minute, this could be a problem.
Right.
But SpaceX is taking steps, right? Like they tested that lower albedo or reflective material on one of them in the November launch. They're testing these different drop-off orbits. They're testing all this stuff, right? They're actively giving out the predictive two-line elements or orbital data for them ahead of time, so observatories can plan when they're all going to come training over right after launch. So it's not like both sides aren't trying to work with each other and come to that understanding. So I think we're going to end up with this happy medium. And, you know, a lot of those really respected astronomers who raised concerns after that first one, you don't hear them raising those concerns now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. As they're working with SpaceX, as they're trying to figure out how both sides can coexist.
Right.
But didn't they coat one with some kind of to help be not so
Yeah, that
reflective?
was the one they had the lower albedo, that they're testing out.
Yeah. So you know, like I think we're going to end up in this happy medium. I think we're going to end up with a medium where by happy I mean like there's been compromises on both sides. No one kind of got exactly what they wanted,
right?
But it's not the end all be all disaster.
It kind of seems to me like
the night sky is ruined.
It seems like it's kind of like an eventuality. Like we're going to move to having more space-based infrastructure, and you know, at some point, whether it was SpaceX or OneWeb or somebody else, there was going to be a large constellation like this providing internet. You know, they just happened to be the first. You know, and has there been any issues or any complaints raised since OneWeb put up their batch of 34?
If there has been, not a lot of people have talked about it.
Okay.
I think OneWeb's constellation is 600 some odd to begin with, can expand upward to 1,200. 1,200 is what SpaceX is aiming for initial operational or operationality with Starlink. Obviously they're planning much more than that, you know, and it's the sheer volume that becomes the question.
And OneWeb's a little higher.
No, you don't see the OneWeb. So yes and no, because OneWeb is going to be one orbital shell. And it is. It's like at 650, 750 or something kilometers up. But then the initial 1,200 satellite constellation from SpaceX is at 550 kilometers. Then there's a 750 kilometer shell, and then there's a 1,200 kilometer shell.
Okay, so there's three.
And it might be those that pose the bigger problem, because the higher up you go, the longer you're in orbital daylight, when the ground might be dark for these observations, right?
Okay.
So the question of how this is all going to look at the end, you can't really answer for that 550 kilometer shell, because it's very close compared to where the outer shells will be.
I was thinking that because they're higher up, then they would be less of a problem because they're smaller. I mean, essentially.
But that's also part of it too, and that's what makes it really hard to kind of pin down what this is precisely going to look like. Because you're exactly right. Like the higher up you go, the longer you're in orbital daylight compared to nighttime on the ground at your latitudes, right? You can get closer to the equator and still be in orbital daylight at midnight, local time, right? But you're farther away, you're very small, you're not as reflective, so it could end up being this thing like where, in terms of the visual, and this is where it gets fascinating, right, is it might not be so much attention was paid to the visual element of that, but that might not be the biggest thing. It might be the radio interlinks between them, right, interfering with radio astronomy, and how do you make sure they're on different frequencies. It could be we're looking at this star because we know this thing in the Kuiper belt is going to occult that star for a fraction of a second. What happens if a Starlink passes that star at the exact same moment?
Ooh, yeah.
Ruins that shot.
Right. Like you could get into all these other weird things, but once they're in orbit, we know where they are and we know where they're going to be with an incredible amount of precision.
Right.
So
And Gene, Space Padre was asking about comments on the upcoming Starlink military live fire demo. What do you know?
Yeah,
What
it's
can we
not
know?
well that they're doing it.
Yeah, that's about all we know, right?
It's pretty much what we can know.
Yeah.
This is not a surprise. We knew that even on the original two Starlink prototypes, Tintin A and B, that were launched on a Vandenberg mission a couple of years ago, that the military had tested communications through them. We knew that after they put up the first batch of the 60 test satellites last May, that the military ran, some exercises with them and ran some tests with them. So the fact that they've moved on to live fire testing with the Starlink constellation, really reveals what that constellation is already capable of, even though they're not ready to roll it out to the masses yet. But it's not a surprise that the military would want to use this, because if you have a complete global communication network that can do this seamless transition and handoff from satellite to satellite, I mean, that's exactly what the Iridiums do. Right. And the military is involved with the Iridium network as well. So it's not a surprise that the military looks at this as yet another avenue for that.
Right. Yeah. And see, how many Iridiums are there's? Like 75, right?
There are 66 in the operational constellation and 9 orbital spares, and there are 10 left on the ground.
Okay. Yeah, I wonder.
Thank you, Matt Dash.
I wonder how that is. I mean, SpaceX and Iridium had a great relationship. I'm sure they still do, but I wonder if it's are their systems going to be working together somehow, or are they even competitors? Are they more different than we realize, or are they just straight up competitors?
It's a great question. I actually asked Matt Dash about this and reported on it a month ago. They're not competitors. They do completely different things in terms of where they are. And Matt sees potential synergy between the Iridium network and Starlink for what exactly they do.
Right.
Where Starlink is really primarily that broadband internet capability, right? Whereas Iridium offers voice and video and maritime distress and aviation and things like that. So not to say that Starlink can't do some of those as well, but that they really do operate in these vastly different realms.
Gotcha. Okay.
That they don't really consider them to be true competitors, where we would talk about the competitor to Starlink is OneWeb.
Right. Yeah, that is definitely
or your local crappy internet service provider.
A colonel in the middle of the desert still wants to see the latest episode of Picard.
Exactly, and he should be able to while on a satellite phone talking to a significant other, right? There you go. The satellite phone is Iridium. The Netflix is Starlink.
Yeah. Okay, so this the last Starlink launch. Wait, was it? Yeah, it was Starlink when the booster crashed. The fairings didn't get caught. I've been tossing this around, and I may be totally off base here, but I'm starting to worry that maybe this method of catching the fairings is not going to be what works.
Feasible.
I don't want to think that, because you could have said that about the first 7 or 8, how many failures there were when the boosters were trying to land. But once they got it, they pretty much got it. They had a couple failures there in the first dozen or whatever, but they pretty much have it now. But I wonder, I don't know, maybe some of your friends, you guys have speculated about what if this fairing recovery method doesn't work?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is, it's really easy to try to compare the boosters, right, and the fairings and the recovery, because SpaceX is all about that. Right. I would say if you try to do that, what you're really trying to say is, okay, I'm going to get in my car and I'm going to drive to work, and I'm going to park in let's say all the parking spaces are numbered,
Mhm.
right? And I'm going to park in parking space number 42 to choose a science fiction.
Right.
Well, you can do that with great precision with your car because it has an engine or an electric battery and it has a steering wheel,
Right.
and the parking space doesn't move.
Right. Right.
Right. Okay, I'm going to take this microphone
Okay.
and I'm going to hurl it toward my work, and I want it to land in parking space number 4.
Right. Ain't gonna work.
But now
Good luck.
space number 4 is constantly moving,
Yeah.
and you can't control the microphone
Yeah.
once you hurl it.
Right. Or very much. They can
Whole
kind of.
different ball game of what they're trying to do, right?
Yeah,
So you know, like the fact that they've had some successes in catching the fairings and that they have also, you know, splashed down in the water, isn't all that surprising, given your two moving targets are trying to desperately align with one another, and one is a ship in the ocean with a lot of resistance from water, with this giant thing that makes it really hard to do precision turns on it. Right. It's not all that surprising that they've missed. What I would honestly say is that I think where this might head toward, right, you know, and what the decision point might be in terms of payload fairing recovery is just that real, like, how much of a pain is it to fish them out of the water, and just refurbish them that way, which we've seen because the Arabs had fairings that were reused on the Falcon 9 flight in November of Starlink, right, landed in the water. They didn't land in the drone ships, and they pulled them out and reused them, and they were just fine. So I think that might be more the calculus of where this might be going is, you know, we have to have the fairing retrieval catcher ships out there anyway. So let's just try to catch them.
Okay, yeah.
And if we miss, we just fish them out of the water and we can still reuse them.
Yeah. And isn't there a thing though? Like, I think one of my concerns is, like, I'm pretty sure I remember hearing that the fairings take a really long time to make, right? Don't they have to bake them for some obscene amount of time? And it's like it takes a while to actually produce one.
I mean, it's not a quick process. No, it's not like an overnight thing, but it doesn't take as long as it takes to produce a booster.
Okay, yeah.
You know,
so I thought I remembered hearing it was like 2 weeks per fairing.
Might be, but it's months per booster.
I thought they were able to churn them out a little quicker than that. Maybe. Okay. Well,
what do we mean by produce then? I guess because, like, do we mean like done and shipped from Hawthorne, or done and shipped from Hawthorne to go to McGregor for their checkouts to then get transported to the launch site to then be ready?
Well, yeah. Well, in terms of the booster, like, they're kind of sitting pretty because they've got a bunch of boosters that they can reuse. But with the fairings, if they if like these last fairings, they didn't just go in the water; they got all broken up. And I wonder if there's a point when they're like, we got to slow down Starlink launches because we're running out of fairings.
Good question.
Yeah.
I honestly don't know the answer to that.
Time will tell.
Yeah, I honestly don't know the answer to that. Yeah, I mean, I guess time will tell. But you know, I don't think they're at the point with fairings, right, where they are with boosters, where, like, as you plan out your yearly manifest, where you can go, okay, and we'll land that booster, and then we'll grab it and pick it up, and we'll put it on this next one, and then we'll get it back and we'll grab it and we'll put it on this next one. I don't think they're at that point with the fairings yet.
Okay.
You know, and I mean, just because, like, we haven't seen any of the others that they've recovered, right, since Arabsat, even the ones they fished out of the water, haven't seen them refly, and we've had 4 or 5 missions that have had fairings since then,
right?
So I think, you know, the sort of plan, just like it was with the boosters, is we keep producing them at a rate to meet our manifest, and when we can actually slow down because we have enough in inventory, or we're comfortable with the recovery method, you know, then you start making those adjustments there.
All right. Well, sticking with SpaceX, we have recently learned. Well, I don't guess NASA said officially, but DM2 probably an extended mission.
I mean, unless they were completely not telling us the truth, which they
Oh,
were.
have
telling
they said?
the truth.
Have they said? Has NASA said for sure?
No, they have not said that. They have not said it publicly at all. But after the in-flight abort test of Dragon in January, Jim Bridenstine and some of the International Space Station people who were there made a point of saying when someone asked the question, I totally forget who it was, but they asked the question of if DM2 is to be an extended mission, what additional things do the crew need to be trained for?
Right.
And they said,
started doing it,
right, exactly, because what the answer was is if we're going to extend DM2 to more than just a 1 week sort of up-down sortie mission, then Bob Bacon has to be trained on spacewalks, and Doug Hurley has to be trained on ISS robotics. And lo and behold, what tweets and images do we get earlier this week? Bob Bacon studying and training for spacewalks, and Doug Hurley training on ISS robotics.
Right.
Yep.
I mean, and let's look at this from a logical standpoint too, right? Because I mean, there's sort of the passive confirmation that that's exactly what it's going to be with those based on what they said. Because if you're only going up for a week, you've got no need to do a spacewalk.
Right.
Like there's nothing to go out and inspect on Dragon. There's nothing. There's no reason you'd be training in ISS suits to go do this thing, right? There's no reason Doug Hurley would be training for robotics. So from a logical standpoint, of course that's what it means, but NASA has not said officially, so we can't say it officially. But also, if you just look at it from a sheer logic standpoint on NASA's side, right? On April 9th, the Soyuz MS-16 launches from Baikonur with 2 Russians and 1 American. The NASA astronaut is Chris Cassidy. A week after they arrive at the station, the U.S. crew segment reduces down to only 1 person from 4 and will remain there until the commercial crew vehicles can begin the standard, they're what's known as post-certification mission. So PCM. So until Dragon and Starliner can begin, or until at least one of them can begin post-certification missions, which are what would follow Demo 2 for SpaceX and what would follow the crew flight test for Starliner. The U.S. operating segment, which consists of the United States, the European Space Agency, the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, and the Canadian Space Agency, is down to 1 astronaut. Can only be a NASA astronaut, an American, because of the way the contracts are written at the beginning of the International Space Station program. So if you're looking at this prolonged gap, which is not just a matter of, well, we want more than 1 person on board the space station, it's a matter of all the science we cannot do.
Right. I think I heard that with 1 person, they basically have to spend all their time on maintenance.
Basically, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
The station is a beast to keep in operation. And so it only makes logical sense that if you have this mission launching 2 people, train them to
so
stay
they can help,
for several weeks. So that you can start doing, because a lot of the experiments, right, a lot, not all, but a lot of the experiments, you don't need dedicated training to perform, right? You can follow the checklist of what to do, right?
Just follow instructions.
And a lot of the training that would involve that way, if you have Bob and Doug up there for several weeks, would allow Chris Cassidy to do a lot of what he was trained to do aside from maintenance operations.
Right. Okay.
And stuff like that. Or while he's doing maintenance because he's trained to do this thing that Bob and Doug aren't, right? They can be doing the follow the checklist on this experiment that's, because the station has a lot of what I like to call plug and play experiments, right? Where you put them in a rack and you flip a few buttons
and then
in a sequence and they do their thing. Right. Exactly. So that would only make sense, right? Now the question becomes, after that, where's Boeing?
I was going to get to that next.
Well, that's
we can talk about Starliner.
Where's Boeing and Starliner in that test sequence? Where is the next Crew Dragon? How long do you want Bob and Doug to stay? knowing you have to get the Demo 2 Dragon back and have it complete its mission before you can really do that final certification. This
Right.
is ready for
Because
operational
this is
flight.
still part of the test. Yeah. Right.
Right.
And are there any more
And
Soyuzes planned between? Like we've got the Soyuz coming in April. Is there another Soyuz planned with Americans on it? I mean, this
yes.
year.
Yeah. So, yeah. No, I'm glad you actually brought that up because this is one of the, and for the life of me, I can't figure out where it started. I don't think NASA can figure out where it started, but there became this idea that once Dragon and Starliner were online, no more American would ever fly on a Soyuz. And that's not true. There will always be an American on every single Soyuz that launches, and the Soyuzes will keep launching until either their replacement crew capsule is ready,
Right.
or until the space station program ends, whichever comes first. Russia will not stop launching, and the reason there will always be one American on every Soyuz. Soyuzes will just reduce down from 4 human flights a year to 2.
Okay.
And the 2 that they give up will be 1 Dragon, 1 Starliner. Right.
Because they'll come and fly with us. Right.
Exactly. Because there'll always be 1 American on a Soyuz. There will always be 1 Russian on every Dragon and every Starliner that launches. And the reason for that goes back to the way those contracts and the laws between Russia and the United States were written in the mid-90s when the station program came to be, that there always has to be 1 Russian and 1 American on the station at all times. And the only way to ensure that is to always have a Russian launching on every American craft and always have an American launching on every Russian craft. And that's the only way we can do it. So yeah, that'll never stop. Like the only thing that kind of becomes interesting and that will stop is, we won't necessarily be paying Russia $85 million a seat for that American because we'll figure out a way to trade and make it equal, even though Starliner and Dragon have vastly different price points per seat.
So is that what
way to make it even?
Is that what they like when they talk about like do we need to order another Soyuz ride or not? Is that just they're just talking about what they're going to have to pay for? Like because we're obviously we're going to keep flying with them, but they're trying to decide when's the last one that we actually have to pay for, kind of.
In a lot of ways, that's it. Yes, that way, right? Because once Dragon or Starliner, once both of them start performing those post certification and crew rotation flights, then you're out of that. That full exchange of money for the price of the seat, and you're into that. How do we have to make how do we make it even?
Yeah, because back when the shuttle was still flying, it was I can't remember the term, but there was no exchanging of funds. It was just
trading. Yeah, it was basically like there was no exchange of funds, but basically the way it wound up was like you build your module, you pay for all of that. And we launch it at no cost to you because you built it, and even though it's part of our side of the station, and then you get an astronaut, you get a seat on that shuttle flight.
It's a barter.
For you.
They're bartering over bartering over rights to space. Okay.
So going back to Bob and Doug here real quick. Now Doug was already a veteran astronaut because wasn't he the one, if I stand corrected, he launched on board 135, correct? STS 135, which is the last.
It was Doug, right? Wasn't it Doug?
It was Doug, yes. So how much?
Yeah, they're both veterans of 2 previous shuttle flights. Yes.
Okay. So they are both 2 previous. Okay, so I guess they would both need the same amount of training then, per se, because of new technology and everything like that.
It's kind of a refresher, right?
Yeah, more or less like a refresher course.
So there are things that are refreshers, but things with those shuttle missions that they both flew, and they each flew 2, is that they were never ISS crew members, right? Even though the shuttle crews would go up and the shuttles would dock and they would go back and forth between the 2 vehicles, right? And the spacewalks in the latter part of the station and shuttle program, even though they happened from the station's airlock, they were shuttle astronauts. So they were technically shuttle EVAs, even though they didn't go out the airlock of the shuttle.
Oh, okay.
So they didn't have training on like all the intricate maintenance details of the station, because that wasn't their job. They were there for 8 to 12 days.
Oh, okay.
Right. When the shuttles were still doing crew rotations, the crew member that would stay is the one who got all the ISS training, like the 2 intensive years of ISS training for that long duration mission. So Bob and Doug never got station EVA training, station robotics training. They never got any of that on their missions.
Right. Okay.
You know, aside from just the very basic, like, you know, there was a shuttle astronaut in the cupola robotics workstation as they were handing off, you know, the modules between the 2 arms, between the shuttle arm and the station arm.
Right.
Like, they never got this training. So for them, it's not really refresher. It's literally like completely new vehicle.
Yeah. So is this going to end up being their longest stays, like in space, like as far as like one single stay?
Yes, because each of them was on a mission that lasted 15 days, 20 some odd hours, something like that. And 2 of their flights were like the standard 12, 13 day flights.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, each of them in terms of a longest stretch have only been in space for about 16 days in one single go. And they've been in space for about, like 25 days total each.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Well,
they're very similar.
Good for
to each
them.
other.
They finally get a longer flight. That's awesome.
Yeah, so as long as Demo 2 is longer than 15 days, yes, they will break their personal records.
I think it's going to be up there for months, personally. I think they're going to be up there for a few months. That's just my personal.
I mean, yeah, NASA hasn't really talked about exactly what the timelines would be, but I would assume if you're going to extend, right, you'd be talking on the magnitude of like 1.5, 2 months. Because remember, this is still a test flight, right? And
still demo.
And, and the emphasis on like it needs to get back and complete that full launch to recovery cycle before you can even start that final certification work to clear them for operational use, right? Is a factor here. Especially, and this might be a perfect segue, especially since we don't know. Now, presently, we're talking about this on Thursday, the 27th. Boeing's teleconference tomorrow.
Yeah, the thing is tomorrow. Yeah, I kind of wish that it was today. Right. Yeah, we'll hear that tomorrow.
But we just don't know right now when we're talking about this live where Boeing actually stands and where Starliner is. I mean, it could literally be anywhere from they might be ready to, if they're going to refly OFT, they might be ready for that in June. Maybe they're not reflying OFT and they're going straight to crew, which means it could be much later. Like, we just don't know where they are in that process and what the independent review team has found from the Starliner issue. So, you know, we could also be in a weird position where, you know, it might be Demo 2 and the first post-certification mission might not be Starliner's crew test flight. It could be another Dragon, or it could be CFT, right? We just don't know where it lands now.
Do you want to say out loud what you think if they should refly OFT?
Not right now, because I want to see what the actual
the data.
Oh God, IRT, independent review team. I want to see what that independent review team finding is in terms of the software issues, the fixes, the recommendations, and everything like that.
Yeah,
before
I like that. Yeah,
personal opinion on that. Yeah,
I can dig that. Well, let's see. Let's go to Becca, because I believe she has some questions. I made a post on the SpaceX Lounge soliciting some questions, and we did get some. I think they're mostly like Starliner related, or not Starship related. We got.
Ooh, okay, I'll do my best, but that changes on a daily basis.
I know, man. It's like there's so much stuff coming out every day. Where's the nose cone at? I don't know.
Listen,
they got a lot.
I'll be doing my best too, reading these to you. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So we have one comment from Winter Sue or some Winter's You, Winter Sue 7. It's a lot of questions. Have a bunch of questions, but they probably all be L2 questions that he may not want to answer in public. So
you have that freedom.
yeah, well,
Yes.
we'll allow it.
Yeah.
Number one, how much progress are you hearing about preparing 39A for Starship?
Yeah, no, 39A is being prepared for Starship. They are still building it, although a lot of the focus has shifted to Boca Chica, because that's where they'll fly first and do their suborbital tests and things like that. But no, there's a huge launch mount and flame deflector and everything being erected on the southeast side of the pad, inside the pad perimeter of 39A for that. And there will also be a landing pad. No, they're still going.
Insane. I can't believe it.
Landing pad right there. Like, yeah. But just, yeah, most efforts have shifted to Boca Chica to get the initial test flights done.
Yeah, there's like nothing going on in Coco right now. Like Kegel lives like right over there. He lives like a mile as the crow flies from the Coco Starship site, and there's like no movement.
Drive by it every day and looks exactly the same. I'll go up close sometime.
I know
nothing's going on.
And you know, like the last couple times, it was one time in January. I think it might have been for in-flight abort. I was coming down there, and I got off of 95 onto the 528, and they're doing all that construction now, right? And they're clearing land on that road. And when I came off, when I was still on that little like loop-de-loop thing coming off of 95 onto the 528, because all the trees are cleared, all of a sudden I could see the cylinder of Starship right there, clear as day, and like I scared my passenger because I was like, "Oh my god, there it is!" Like,
and they did all that preparation like to roll it out, and I don't think they're ever going to do it now. I think it seems like the plans have changed. Like that particular Starship, and I don't know if they'll do anything else with that site. It seems like it's all being moved to Roberts Road, if anything. Like there was a whole thing where they were going to hold off on, or Virgin was going to hold off on that overpass with the new train thing that they're building until they got Starship moved, and it seems like all that's out the window.
Oh, they're building the bridge.
The bridge is going up now.
Oh yeah, the pillars are there. They're pouring the molds to, put the big whatever structures for the train.
Yeah,
it's well underway.
Yeah, I mean, it would make sense to shift a lot of operations onto site, right, and onto base where you've got more control over it, and you're closer to your particular launch site. I really honestly don't know what's going on with the Sidco location in Coco and in Titusville, because just so much of everything has shifted at this point to Boca Chica, that and the design for Starship has changed a little bit. How they're going to construct it has changed. So, since that prototype was built at the Sidco Road facility. So, I agree. It's an open-ended question, but
could you do financially too? Just two sites doing the same thing. Why not just do it at one?
Well, the whole idea was to have the competition of trying to figure out the best way to do it.
But I mean, for a company, it seems pretty expensive.
Yeah.
To maintain two sites. Yeah. Very much so. There's a time consideration too. Eventually they will have to. Any Starship that launches from Florida, they do, as of right now, have to build it in Florida.
Yeah.
We just don't have things big enough to transport.
Yeah.
Never say never. It's Elon. You never know.
We had. Let's see. I was on.
Earth point to point a Starship from Boca Chica to Texas.
The Airbus.
We were. I was on the Rudd's podcast the other day, and we were speculating, and how they've got the approval to build over at the LA port. And we were like, I wonder if maybe that's where they're going to build Super Heavy, because there's no sign of Super Heavy at Boca Chica right now. But I guess they'd still have to be able to build it there, wouldn't they?
Well, here's the thing I'll say about Boca Chica. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not there.
That's true.
And the reason I say this is because if you had asked people 2 weeks ago, where the heck is Starship SN1, right? So that's serial number 1.
Right.
And how are they going to meet these flight test dates in March? Right. Per the FCC permits and everything. Everyone would have gone like, well, how? They haven't started fabricating everything. And lo and behold, they were building all of the rings inside this secret facility that nobody could see, and they just brought them out one at a time and stacked them. Yep. And within 4 days, there was a freaking Starship and spaceship fully assembled. I mean, so like that's what I'll say about Boca Chica. Just because you can't see it, don't mean it not there.
True that. What else?
But
go ahead.
They also don't really have to be building the Super Heavy booster right now, right? Because of the flight test sequence and the suborbital test flights. That they need to do a Starship first, right?
Yeah. Well, that's what Elon said.
Yeah,
he said that they wanted to get Starship nailed down because Super Heavy, they can kind of, once they learn what they need to learn about Starship, then Super Heavy they can kind of just throw together, essentially.
Yeah.
I mean, it's essentially just a gigantic Falcon 9 first stage.
Exactly.
It's a methane tank, and it's a methane tank, an oxygen tank, an engine mount section, and grid fins. Boom.
Yep.
Yeah, that's not the iterative super design, because man, I'm still so anxious and excited to see Starship do its I call it the flip and wiggle.
Yeah,
like comes down like that and it goes wham, whoa, whoa. I mean, yeah, I was actually standing next to a Declan Murphy at that presentation at Boca Chica last September, and when we both saw that animation. I'm assuming I can say whatever I want, whatever swear word I want.
Yeah.
All right. Our reaction to that was like, fucking hell. Like, are they serious? And then we nerded out and tried to figure out a whole bunch of math after that. That night. But yeah, no, they need to nail down that, because that's the real iterative and massively forward-thinking design.
Yeah.
Right. The booster is a booster. For all intents and purposes.
Right. All right, Becca. What's next? And that was just the first of 7 questions.
The first of 7, yeah. But
I'll be briefer.
Well, some of them.
It's okay, man. This is what you're here for. As long as I forgot to ask you if you had a hard out, because
I do not know.
Okay, cool. All right, let's just roll with it.
Well, that was the first of 7 questions from the first question asker. But the thing is, a lot of them have already been answered, such as stuff about Starship and stuff and how you got started with NSF. So I'm going to skip those because they have already been answered. Number 2 is Blue Origin finally producing anything at their big factory? How close are they, if not?
Well, that might be...
Sorry, coughing, lungs.
It might be hard to talk about.
That's a little hard to talk about. Yeah. I would say that just I would put it this way: based on the timeline that they have for New Glenn, their big orbital rocket, they better be. They better be for those stages at this point. And I think I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question is Virgin Galactic still progressing toward launch in Scotland? And are there any rumors within the community about the target date for commercial human flight from New Mexico?
Yes to the first one. There's still I think and more than just Virgin Galactic are interested in that spaceport in Scotland.
Who else you got?
Yes, things are still moving forward. I know there's still some I know they're still working out a few things with some of the local crofters and landowners up there, but there does seem to be an upwelling of support to bring that spaceport there, just as long as the sort of logistics and local concerns can be answered and worked out appropriately. In terms of Spaceport New Mexico, or I'm sorry, Spaceport America in New Mexico, yeah, the VSS Unity, the ship itself for suborbital human spaceflight, was just moved there last week,
Right.
or 2 weeks ago, last week.
I think
probably.
it was last week.
A
Yeah,
lot
it
to
was.
keep track of.
Yeah,
There's a lot to keep track of.
yeah. And they counted that as like a capture carry test, right? Is that the right word?
Yes.
Capture carry. Yeah.
Yeah, because they had to like, yeah, because they couldn't just fly it there on its own. Yeah, they had to take the whole ship, like the actual plane that lofts it into the air, that it releases from underneath it before it ignites its engine. Yeah, they had to do the whole test. They did circling tests. They did, you know, in the air tests of everything for that, and then landed in New Mexico. I mean, gorgeous when they landed because it had just snowed. It was an absolutely gorgeous, picturesque thing. But yeah, that was the final big thing. They've got some more tests coming up that they want to do with it at Spaceport America, just to make sure all of that, everything is working and functional there. But I mean, they could be on track for this year. I mean, so could Blue Origin for the New Shepard could be on track for this year. I mean, both companies stated at this time last year that they wanted to do those first crew suborbital flights in 2019.
Right.
So the fact that both are at their launch sites, that both have continued to enjoy success, like this could be an incredible year, honestly. Just the commercial crew program comes to fruition, but where the suborbital space tourism also comes to fruition as well for both of these.
One of the things I was wondering about Virgin Orbit is, you know, they're looking at different different facilities they could use to launch from, and I was just wondering, like, if, like, could they, you know, as long as like the runway's long enough and whatever, could they basically launch from anywhere? Like, what kind of infrastructure would they need to fuel up that rocket? Can they fly with that infrastructure in the plane? Can they fly around with like liquid oxygen and kerosene and stuff, or like, how does that work? Do they need stuff to be on the ground already?
Yeah, so this is where Northrop Grumman's Pegasus rocket that launches from underneath the wing of the L-1011 aircraft is both an interesting parallel and at the same time not at all an applicable not at all applicable. So Northrop Grumman went with the Pegasus rocket, right, when they made it out in California together, and then they fly it to wherever it's actually going to launch from, be it the Cape, Kwaj Atoll in the Pacific, or Vandenberg. It's a solid fueled rocket.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yes, so they don't have a choice but to have it fully fueled. But you know, there's a lot of government regulation that comes with, if you're going to basically be carrying a small, and it is a bomb.
It's a bomb.
I mean, it sounds inflammatory, but it's a small bomb underneath that aircraft, because the possibility of an in-flight failure, right, even though aircraft and air travel is immensely safe, like that exists, right? So, you know, the flight paths are very carefully designed of where it's going to go, and, you know, and things like that, especially if it's crisscrossing the country, like that. So like, it's not one of those things where, like, for Virgin Orbit, where like they could land the plane in the unfueled rocket or at Orlando International Airport or LaGuardia in New York, truck in, you know, liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen.
Oh, is it hydrogen?
And like, or whatever it is.
Oh, okay. All right. I was like, what?
You know, whatever the fuel is to the oxidizer.
Gotcha.
You know, the calculuses are very different, and especially since they're on the commercial side of that, right? They fall under the Commercial Space Organization of the FAA and the FCC and everything like that, which has very stringent rules, right? And we're not quite at the point yet where the FAA and the FCC are comfortable with major rule changes, right? Like, we saw a very gradual relaxing of the rule here in Florida to allow polar launches. We've seen a very gradual relaxing of, you have to prove to us what you can do with this rocket before you're allowed to bring it back on land, right? And now SpaceX, like that whole 20-kilometer hop of Starship is going to be to come right back down on land. You know, like, they're getting to the point where they're more comfortable with things, but there are still hard no's for public protection,
Right.
Especially when rockets are young, right, and before they really prove themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Young little rocket babies.
I
Babies.
know.
What else you got, Becca?
Okay. Are you hearing about any additional British launch providers other than Virgin Orbit?
Not personally.
There you go.
Okay.
I'm
Cut
sure
and
it's
dry.
not yet.
Dust your hands off. Move on.
Right.
When will a Starship Sunday series start? Winky face. I think that's important.
Can you say that again?
Oh,
Sure.
Starship Sunday. Oh, because Falcon Friday. What is it?
Oh, okay. Well, it's called Shuttle Sunday.
Shuttle Sunday. Yeah.
So it would have to be Starship Saturday.
There you go. Yeah.
I hate to burst your bubble on that one.
Nobody's taking the Shuttle Sunday.
NSF does every single Sunday.
I know. Yeah. I love it, man. I get to see footage that I never saw before. You know, it's good. I like it that you guys do that.
Yeah. I'd say that a Starship Saturday would commence when they start flying.
Yeah.
That's what I'd say to that. Yeah.
Solid timeline.
Yep.
Okay.
What else you got?
Okay, moving on to the next question asker, DJ Hennes or some. He asked about the DM2 timeline, which we discussed.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts about Boeing Starliner issues? We talked about that too, huh?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, your questions have been answered.
We talked about
DJ.
I mean, I guess we talked about it in some regard. I mean, like how I didn't want to speculate personally about OFT, but
yeah,
you
want to go? Yeah, we'll go over like the kind of the timeline of like first they had their launch. It was a rough day for them, and we kind of thought, okay, well, man, like obviously you feel bad for the engineers that worked all this time for this, and and then that happened, and then just as time has gone on, it's like there's been hidden thing after hidden thing that they supposedly were being transparent about, and then more stuff just continually comes out.
Yeah. So what we know right now is that there were three major things that happened on the orbital flight test of Starliner over a 2-day period. Two of them are classed by NASA as anomalies, and significant anomalies. And these were the software issues. The mission event timer software anomaly that happened 31 minutes after launch that crippled the mission for all intents and purposes. Mm-hmm. That was the mission shortening failure that prevented it from getting to the International Space Station. Mm-hmm. And then you had the software anomaly at the end of the mission that they caught before it became a loss of vehicles.
Only because they were re-going over the code from the initial problem.
Right. Boeing's statement was that they only caught the second issue because they deep dived into the software after the first issue, and had the first issue not occurred or not been as significant, they might not have caught the second one. Of interesting note, Boeing said in mid-January that they didn't consider the second one to be an anomaly because it didn't happen, because they caught it ahead of time. We can argue semantics all we want. NASA still considers that an anomaly.
Okay, so that's one that they consider. Okay.
And to be fair, both of those software issues NASA was very, very blunt about, were loss of vehicle errors that would have resulted in the loss of the vehicle had the ground not intervened. And the interesting part about the first one, which leads us to the third major thing that occurred, which was not classed as an anomaly but an issue, was a communications issue. Mm-hmm. Now, this is the one we don't know a lot about, that we're going to learn a lot more about with the independent review team report, which should be out next week or shortly thereafter, in early March. Because this is one that by the time they held the press conference, because the second anomaly had been publicly outed by the NASA Advisory Council, and they had to hold a press conference to talk about it, and then that's when we learned about the third issue. They were very clear that the independent review team had not finished their assessment of that, so there was nothing really to say about it from the independent review team. But what Boeing did end up saying about it was that it was part of the reason that they had trouble communicating with Starliner in that moment when they were trying. It wasn't just a tedious tracking and
that's what
relay satellite handoff thing. It was a combination of a few things, at least as it was related. The most bizarre part of that to me, and I say bizarre not as a not to be taken as a like an indication of a personal bias, but like bizarre in that, you know, when you kind of look at something weird and you're like, well, that's bizarre because you've never seen it before or you've never heard of it being an issue before, is that Boeing sort of alluded to this fact in mid-January that this communications issue was caused by cell phone tower interference. I don't know how you missed that in ground testing, because in the middle of the ocean, how are you
built
not
to handle that?
So there's a lot of questions that are still around that, but that's kind of all we know about it, right? So a reason why that IRT report is going to be really beneficial in helping us learn, you know, and understand really what happened. But that's sort of what happened over the course of that mission. Now, we obviously knew about the first one when it happened because it prevented Starliner from getting to the right orbit. We knew the mission was ending very quickly, you know, thereafter. And it's worth pausing for a moment to say, none of this is United Launch Alliance's fault. None of it was the Atlas V rocket's fault. It was the software on Starliner, which Atlas was we're perfectly in its new configuration.
One of the things.
So hats off to ULA on that one.
Yeah, definitely.
You know?
Yeah, ULA is still flawless. One of the things that we talked about on the show and we're kind of pissed off about is somebody, I want to say it was ABC, they went and they did their little like on the scene reporter guy talking back to the main place, and he was talking about how it was the Centaur upper stage that had failed and caused this. Did you see that clip?
I did not know.
Man, they just got it so wrong. They blamed it on the rocket, and you know, I understand. You know, maybe he just flubbed up, but man, come on. That was a big point that everybody made. Is like the Atlas V performed perfectly. It was not the rocket's fault.
So some of this, which, you know, to preface, right, in terms of like what's been talked about, right, is in some ways Boeing officials are saying that they did think they had mentioned these other two issues, but that maybe they didn't describe them in a way that made people understand what was the real issue, right? So so however you want to look at that, for fairness' sake, right? That's that's part of it. But it has appeared, right, and the appearance has been, and certainly to us in the media, that we went from one issue to wait, there was another significant one, to wait, there were three, to this week, what do you mean they didn't put the thing in the simulator and actually test the software from liftoff to landing,
integrated with the rocket simulator?
Yeah, and I know there was a lot of questions and a lot of, there was a lot of discussion about this on social media the last 2 days, including a lot of people in software and engineering industries going, this is like software 101, right? That you test the whole thing and how it's integrated together, and how the thruster software logic is going to interact with the navigation logic, and all of that, which we now know definitively didn't happen. Right. So here are the larger questions to me that are outstanding, right, with this is, What was the decision process to arrive at all of these software testing things did not have to occur before we actually fly it?
Mm-hmm.
How did NASA, how did Boeing engineers miss this when they were doing their own review of the software?
Right.
How did NASA miss this when they were doing their review of the software?
Mm-hmm.
How did the independent verification and validation software company miss it when they were doing the outside investigation of it?
Yeah.
There are a range of possibilities to that, up to and including that what NASA and the independent outside company were looking at is, well, this is what should happen when we input this. Is that what happens? And then the things that they tested were exactly as Boeing had said they should be.
Okay.
Right. So this is not to say that maybe NASA and that outside team, this isn't to say that they were negligent.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's what were they given to test?
Right.
Right. What were they told were the applicable outcomes? Do they match? Yes. Right. Then maybe you've got good software.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So there's that question. But the larger question for NASA, and it's a larger question I have for NASA and not Boeing, is how did NASA sign off on saying it's perfectly fine not to do an end-to-end systems integration test?
Right. That's
Bingo.
just surprising that NASA would take that stance. I mean, like NASA is like the most careful, risk-averse agency. There's complaints about them being too risk-averse, and how did they not make them do this?
Something don't smell right, Paul.
And a fair question as well. Would they have done, or did they do the same for SpaceX? And I can almost guarantee you that the answer to that is no.
Right.
Yeah.
But
I
I would
almost 100% guarantee you that SpaceX did the end-to-end systems testing
themselves.
and that NASA would not have let them not do it.
But SpaceX has they've got a reputation for loving testing, and it seems like they would do that on their own. I mean, I don't know. This is an outsider
they blew
talking.
up a Falcon 9 just to test the abort system, and they didn't actually have to do that for the contract.
They signed up.
I liked it.
Yeah. Yeah,
I did too, except it was behind a freaking cloud 2 seconds before the abort trigger, and we saw nothing from the press side.
Dude. I'm so sorry for you guys, man. I was like, I can't wait to see what everybody at the press site got.
Right.
We heard it.
Nothing.
Yeah.
And the only thing that, right, and I mean, one thing that this does just bring up, and it's a legitimate question. I don't bring it up from a personal standpoint. I bring it up because I see it. I get asked it all the time, right? It comes down to a question of the double standard, right? Whether that's a perceived double standard on your part or an actual double standard.
Yeah.
I would argue that it's pretty clear which one it is, but you do end up with this question of what was the decision within Boeing that was reached to not do these certain things?
Yeah, it had to be decided by people.
Sign off on these.
Right. Yeah. It wasn't just, whoops, we forgot.
Why did NASA sign off on this? And those are valid questions, that I think both agencies should have to answer.
Yeah.
Of how we arrived at this point. Which, we'll see what the recommendation is. We'll see what NASA decides to do. To Boeing's credit, they have taken a charge, a $410 million charge against themselves, meaning that if OFT, the orbital flight test, has to be reflown, it's not NASA or the U.S. taxpayer paying for that.
Right.
It's Boeing.
Yeah.
Itself.
And that is good that they'll do that. Yeah.
And, to their credit, they're protecting for that.
Mm-hmm.
And if they have to do it, it would be the capsule that was originally intended for the crew flight test that would fly it, because it's the next one in line.
Yeah.
And it is appropriate to mention as well that while we did have those two major anomalies in the software, while we do have the issue with the communication system that we'll wait to hear more about and what exactly that was in the report, there was still, and in all fairness, there was still 80% of that mission and the objectives that were accomplished on OFT. So OFT was not an outright failure. I would personally classify it as a partial failure because it was not able to demonstrate autonomous docking, or rendezvous and docking and undocking and station operations,
Right.
which is a huge part of the contract. But it is important to note that 80% of the mission objectives were accomplished successfully, and we did get excellent data on Starliner. So, whatever the decision ends up being, whether you refly OFT or you can proceed to crew flight test with a delay of some kind to fix the issues and validate that the issues have been fixed. It's not like we're putting crew on a vehicle that hasn't flown before and that we haven't tested and that we don't have good data for.
Right.
They did get that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, they did a lot of tests.
That is.
Yeah, they did a lot in orbit. They tested out some of the docking maneuvers without actually being close to the space station, right?
Right. So there is a legitimate argument that can be made and a legitimate path laid out for why a second uncrewed flight test might not be necessary and why you could proceed to crew. But a lot of that, I think, is all ultimately going to come down to the comfortability of the software and the verification and validation steps that will now have to take place for that.
Right.
For re-verification and revalidation of that software will be the prime calculus for whether it's crewed or uncrewed.
Well, I'm looking forward to the call tomorrow. That's going to be public, right? Anybody can listen into that, right?
Not.
Oh, it's not?
No, it is not. It is technically a round table, an industry roundtable.
Okay.
But media are allowed to report on it.
Okay.
We are allowed to report on what was said in that, but the actual.
So you'll actually be in a room?
It is not.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. All right. Well, I can't wait to hear what you hear. Yeah. Hey, another question that I warned you that I was gonna bring up, and I don't know if you know anything more than we knew whenever it happened, but the hole in the Soyuz. Whatever happened with that? Did they ever get to the bottom of that?
Right. Last year, MS9, 2 years ago.
Yeah, it was like 2 years ago.
That was 2018, right?
I think so.
Yes, because it was before the MS10 in-flight abort, because it was MS09 that the hole was in. No, I don't think anyone's heard anything after that. I mean, and the hard part is, the hard part with that one is everything. Like all we couldn't actually get that part of the Soyuz back because it was in the orbital module. So the Soyuz, when you look at it, right, it's got the bottom part with the solar wings,
right,
solar arrays. It's got the center module where the crew resides, and it's got the orbital bulbous module where the docking port and adapter are. And the hole was in the orbital module, but the orbital module and the bottom module don't survive atmospheric reentry,
right.
So we couldn't get back.
Right.
So, there were no like post-flight analyses that they could do with it. I mean, I don't think we heard anything after Russia's sort of little internal investigation that really tried to blame it on sabotage.
Right. Yeah.
I can guarantee you this: it was not drilled in space.
Right. Yeah. Well, that was absurd.
I mean, no way.
That was absurd. Yeah. I mean, if it was sabotage, it was done on the ground. But even then, why would? But the picture. I actually have it pulled up. I know you've seen it and you remember it. But you see the little skip marks from the drill bit, next to the hole, right? It's.
Oh yeah.
I don't.
I mean, I would, as the saying goes, I would bet dollars to donuts that this was an honest to God mistake on the ground.
Okay.
That someone tried to repair, and
they didn't want to lose their job.
Enough ways. Yeah, and it was repaired in enough ways that it passed the pressurization and leak checks. And it was only because once you get on orbit and you're going through 16 sunrises and sunsets and massive thermal swings from 200 degrees above Fahrenheit to negative 300 degrees below Fahrenheit. And as that skin of the Soyuz expands and contracts and expands and contracts 16 times a day, eventually that epoxy was just going to give way. Right. And that's what happened. I mean, that would be my honest to God answer for what that was. Is it was just a mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next question. Christina Cook. Why is she doing so much better days after returning than Scott Kelly? I listened to his book, and he was having it rough. Like she seems like she's doing okay. I haven't heard anything more. Like there was that video of her getting home and and seeing her dog and everything. Here, I'll show it. Yeah. It's up on the screen.
Like
Becca, did you see this video that we're talking about? Here, I'm gonna share the screen so you can see it. You're gonna love this.
Oh.
Yeah, this is Christina Cook. She just came back. She now holds the record for longest space flight by a woman, right?
Yep, 328 days in space.
Yeah. It's just awesome. But yeah, I want to say that I heard that like she's reporting that like she's feeling pretty good, like all things considered, right? That she's not having it as rough. Anybody said anything about it? Like, is there something different with the female body that they adjust better from space back to Earth or anything?
Yes. So the male and female bodies do react differently in space and microgravity, and they change in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
But also but also this is really one of those moments where like everyone is different in terms of how they can react.
Oh, even individually, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because some people come back from 6 month missions, and they're and they're really affected by it. The tricky thing with this is that unless the astronaut themselves wants to say any adverse side effects, right? Because of medical privacy laws in the United States, we can't know.
Right, unless they choose to say.
And we can't, right, exactly. Yeah. So, there was that book, HIPAA laws, exactly. There was that book that Scott Kelly,
Endurance.
wrote, and was a part of, so he was free to say whatever he wanted in that because it's his own information to divulge.
Right.
But NASA couldn't divulge that information without his permission.
Right.
So it's kind of that same thing, but there are people who have come back from 6 months on Mir, right? We used to bring them back on when the shuttles would do the crew rotations to the station and everything. They would come back from 6 month missions on the early days of the station on special seats that were like beds on the shuttle, so they were basically lying down, right, during landing.
Wow, really?
Yeah, and now they're just in regular seats on the Soyuz. Like when the Soyuz come back and things like that, and you see them have to climb up out the top,
right,
and everything like that. Versus, and it's just that moment of like as we learn and, like earlier days, right? It's an abundance of caution. It's this, it's that, and just react differently.
We don't know if we're going to even be able to swallow.
That she was like, right. I mean, so yeah, it's entirely possible she was like, yo, I'm good.
She's like, I'm fine. What's your problem?
And go on, because like when Peggy came back after 9 months, she was up and about.
Yeah.
Really quick as well.
Artemis.
Cool.
Artemis. So we 2024. 2024 is Trump going to get his wish? I don't know. And now there's like a change. Like now that like the Senate or Congress in general has gotten a hold of it, that like they want to shift the focus back to Moon to Mars, and there's not like not a lot of talk about sustainable presence on the moon. Even though that's what Jimbo's been pushing. And I love Jim Bridenstine, and I like that he's been pushing the sustainable presence on the moon and stuff. And then it's like an obviously that's going to be a stepping stone to Mars, but now it seems like the budget came out I guess a couple of weeks ago, and it's like, well, we want it to like basically just do a touch and go on the moon and focus back on Mars, which was what the focus was before Artemis was announced. It's like this flip-flop thing. It keeps going back and forth. Are we ever going to get anything accomplished?
Yeah, welcome to the state of this program since George W. Bush announced it in 2000.
Right.
Your guess is as good as mine. If you're asking me flat out, will lunar landing in 2024 happen? No, it won't. And it won't because of the natural stretch that occurs in all of these things, right? I mean, SLS will not debut until at the earliest the 18th of April 2021. The first crewed Orion and SLS flight is not until 2023.
Right.
At this point.
Right.
You know, I mean, yeah, theoretically you could put people in on the third one in 2024, and hopefully there's a lander. I mean, I think our only option at this point is Blue Origins.
Yeah.
And I don't say that in a degrading way. You know, I don't say that.
No, absolutely.
I'm saying like it's the only architecture we have,
Yeah.
right? So it's our only option. Will the spacesuits be ready?
Yeah. Well, and then the budget
Be
said
able to get outside of the lunar lander.
the budget was saying that the lunar lander has to be owned by the government. It can't be a private contractor, right?
Well,
isn't that what they said?
Yes. This is one of those weird things where like the government can buy it, so they own it.
Okay, well, if that's the case, that's fine. But it seemed like they were going back to the old school way of, we're going to get a contractor to build our thing, and it will be ours, and they can't use it on their, that whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of these weird. So right, what you're talking about, right, is the President Trump's budget proposal for fiscal year 2021, which begins on October 1 of this year, because the fiscal year begins 3 months earlier than the actual calendar, whatever. However, we decided to do that.
They lost track of the days when they first started counting. I don't know.
Yeah. The House will have its own idea of what to do with this. The Senate will have its own idea of what to do with this. The biggest thing I can say about the Trump budget and the Trump administration's budget for fiscal year 2021 is almost all of it is dead on arrival in Congress, as most presidential budgets are.
Yeah.
And the House and the Senate will each individually do their own thing, and then they'll have to come together to figure out how to make it the same to pass it. I mean, but I mean, the whole history of this program, has been, and they are technically separate programs by funding, but you're going to understand why I'm calling them one program here. Is you had the one announced by George W. Bush in January of 2004, which included the Ares 1, which was the crew launch vehicle for Orion, and then the Ares 5, which was the cargo launch vehicle, and then what was known as Ares 4, which was a combined crew and cargo vehicle.
Okay.
Ares 4 is simply SLS with a new paint job. Let's be very clear about that.
Well, if it's even going to have the paint job with the swooshes and everything.
Well, it didn't have the swooshes.
We want the swooshes.
Well, that's the other thing. SLS has had quite a few public relations only paint schemes, including bizarrely the black and white Apollo thing, which was never going to happen.
Yeah, that was weird.
And they did solely because it would have looked like Ares.
Right.
It had to look different in the publicity photos because it was a new program, a new rocket. It was not. It was not. But it wasn't for a very logical reason, right? Why start from scratch? You had a heavy lift vehicle in this conceptual design phase.
Yeah.
Right. Why throw it out? On the logical side, why throw it out? Right. But then on the practical and political side, no senator and congressperson from Louisiana was going to let that core stage be destroyed.
Right.
No one from Utah was going to let there not be solid rocket boosters. No one from Huntsville was going to let anyone but Marshall manage that program, right? You have all of these political realities of where these things have to be built, right? And if you had the timeline that you wanted to meet, you're not going to start completely from scratch,
Yeah,
right? You're going to take
every 4
twin
years.
solid rockets, which are virtually done.
Right.
There was
Yeah.
work they did and changes they made, but like virtually they're done. You just throw the fifth segment on, you do the qualification tests, and off you go. And the solid rocket boosters have been in storage for the first SLS flight for over a year now. They're just simply waiting to be shipped.
Oh, I didn't know
to the
that. Oh, cool.
The interim cryogenic propulsion stage is done and has been here for 2 years in storage
Wow.
at the Kennedy Space Center.
So it's just waiting on the core.
The core stage the core stage and Orion and the software have perpetually been the red items for this, right? So I mean, like you legitimately, like this thing has been around in some iteration since 2004. And every 2 years, something massively shifts and changes in what it's being asked to do, where it's being asked to go. And then that changes. And then the other thing changes. And then the other thing changes. And then the commercial market blew in this way that nobody really envisioned in the early years of this program. No one envisioned that Falcon Heavy and Starship would be directly competing with the same classes of launches for SLS. No one, I mean, Blue Origin was by far the biggest wild card that emerged successfully, right, in this with New Glenn. And you've got, the stalwart workhorse of United Launch Alliance in here too, that we sort of ended up at this place where it's like, NASA's having to admit that we would save billions of dollars by launching Europa Clipper on something that isn't the SLS, but there's a congressionally mandated law that it has to launch on SLS, so it has to cost over $1 billion for the launch.
But it'll get there faster.
Right? It could get there faster. Yes, and that's true.
It actually, to me, that's like, that's
you've
okay.
Also got this weird thing where, like, the lunar gateway is needed for the Artemis architecture, but the gateway will be constructed completely by commercial launches.
Yeah.
So really, SLS launches Orion, maybe the lunar lander. We don't know yet. I mean, honestly, we don't know yet. Right? I mean, because if the lunar lander is pre-positioned at the gateway, then all SLS is launching is the crew.
Yeah,
on Orion,
it's gonna. It is going to be really hard to
verification from NASA on is where what is the actual plan? For it, and that's what we're hoping to get here with the selection of the lunar architecture here in the coming weeks, and those announcements of who's been chosen to do this. But the thing that really has to be remembered about SLS and the Artemis program, it's almost incorrect to think of it as a NASA program, right? NASA is the agency in charge of executing the directives they are given by congressional and legal mandates.
Right.
And Congress can change its mind, and Congress does routinely. What these things are, and that has been a detriment to. I would argue that has been a detriment to SLS. It has been a detriment to commercial crew when Congress has changed its mind about funding. Right. Especially when we see how quickly. I mean, look. I mean, Blue Origin shocked us all when they're like, "And look, a lander," and we're like, "What? Where'd that come from?"
Blue moon.
Yeah. I mean, and SpaceX, even though Falcon Heavy, was a few years late, it was not nearly as late as SLS is. And it's not nearly as over budget as SLS.
Oh, no.
Right. But the blame for that overrun is not NASA's. It's Congress constantly changing the funding structure and, these cost plus contracts that the government signs with things like, you can have your opinions on the cost overruns of this, but nothing is illegal about it.
Right.
And it's exactly how everything has operated. The only thing that's really changed is the spotlight of what the commercial, privately owned industry can do.
Right.
versus government programs, and that's really, been to the detriment of SLS, because that rocket really did begin as the thing that was in a lot of ways a game changer in its throw power.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it was supposed to be kind of a easy thing to do relatively, because it was taking a bunch of shuttle hardware and just basically configuring it differently so that your orbiter is not on the back of your fuel tank. Originally, that's how it was sold. But yeah, it can't be overstated that that NASA has to follow what Congress tells them to do. It's NASA receives a lot of criticism, from flip flopping or wasting money or whatever, and they are just doing what they are being directed to do. If the engineers and everybody at NASA had their way, then we would already be back on the moon. But it's not up to them
in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like that criticism that's leveled against NASA for that, I would argue, just like you said, is not fair, because they are not in many ways able to make a lot of the decisions themselves. They have to execute the decisions that get made for them.
Right.
In ways that also please all of the constituents and all of the senators and all of the congressmen and women, right, and who represent these districts in these states. And you do end up with good things that you can tout, right, that, like, here's all the states that contribute to the SLS program, to Artemis in some way.
Yeah.
Right. But like, I was seeing something from, but there was something in that environmental assessment report from SpaceX this morning that SpaceX has suppliers in almost every state.
Oh, really?
So the commercial entities do as well.
Well,
right.
Good. That's great. That's really good.
Right.
That means that every state has interest in, even without building SLS, every state has some interest in the aerospace industry.
And I admit, like, when I read that line, I was like, whoa, really?
Yeah. That's crazy. I had no idea.
Like, I immediately went to, I was like, well, wow, I guess Blue Origin would too then at that point, right?
Yeah, you would assume, yeah.
And
I mean,
and you would assume, like, the part of the stories that don't get told, right? About the various involvements that states have, even when you don't think of Maine as a space state.
No.
But they could build sensors.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That wind up in these engines, like it's awesome.
Here, so since we are talking about politics, I was wondering, do you think it's possible that whenever it comes time, like maybe, I don't know if now's the time while we're doing, like they're doing the primaries and stuff, but do you think that it's possible that, all of space Twitter can all get together behind like one person's tweet? It could be yours, but like it, retweet it, push it as much as possible, and try to get a good space question pushed to the debates, because they never ever talk about it. Is there some way that we could get behind, a wave comes, and the debate, the people that run the debate can't help but read this question, like a crowdsourced tweet.
They're too far in the debate right now where they just put each other down. And make fun of
Yeah,
each other.
maybe the primary is not the time to do it, but once it comes to the presidential debates, because I will completely partition all my, I don't have much politics really. The only part I'm interested in is the space stuff, and I kind of like what has been happening since Trump has been in office. I don't know how much he's directly responsible for, but I would like to know what any opposition wants to do different or the same as what he's doing.
See, I like your question, and I wish there were questions about about space exploration in there. My fear, right, is you ask a question like that, and what's even if you remove, even if you move President Trump from this, right, and let's say it's a year where like no one can run for re-election, right? It's too new,
right?
It's right on either side. What are they going to say aside from "I support it"?
Right. They say something.
Right. I mean, because honestly, like from my personal side of things, right? But, whether Trump is reelected, whether whoever the Democratic nominee is elected in November, I would just personally love an administration for once that comes in for once since the 1960s.
Yeah.
Let me clarify that.
Yeah.
That
The calculus age.
Yeah, that comes in and says, just keep going on that trajectory.
Yes.
Right?
Keep doing what you're doing.
Not change it again, and because that's what frustrates me more or less. The commercialization era that came under the Obama administration, the roots of the SLS program that trace back to the George W. Bush administration. There are things you can constantly pull that remain more or less constant, right? Like NASA's working on the next rocket. Well, that's been a constant for 16 years,
right?
At this point. No one's going to come in and say we got to get rid of the International Space Station.
No.
Right.
No one's going to do that.
No.
Right. But it's this, what are we using SLS for? What are we using the ISS for? What is this next program going to do? How much do we want to fund it? How much do we want to just keep it the same?
Yeah.
Don't change it. Introduce new things, new capabilities that they can enable. But for the love of God, don't
Leave it
change
alone.
it.
Just stop canceling things.
Leave it alone.
And honestly, if someone said that in a debate,
you got it. You got my vote.
Come on, yep,
I think they're doing a great job. I'm just going to leave it as is.
But I think the danger you run into, and here's why I'm always nervous when space exploration comes up in presidential elections. You will inevitably have a large segment of the population that goes, well, we can't have healthcare. We can't afford healthcare. We can't afford border security, and I'm going to leave it at that because that hits two talking points from two different poles of politics pretty succinctly, who are going to say, well, we can't afford this, we can't afford that. Why are we spending all that money in space?
Right. Which those same people don't realize just how little we're spending.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But all you have to do is say that.
Yep.
Right? All they have to do is say that.
Yeah.
And that's why I get really, really, really nervous when these things come up in election cycles, is what the public perception is of this, especially when we're already in an era where the public perception seems to be very much give it all to new space and get rid of old space. How many people still think NASA shut down at the end of the shuttle program?
Right. Yeah. No, I hear it. Yeah, I hear it all the time.
And this is not a knock on the people who believe that. This is not a knock on the people who are saying give it all to the commercial side, and the people saying no. We can't do that. It's just these are the actual pockets of conversations that are taking place, right? And especially since we're already in this polarizing time, regardless of if it's political or space or whatever. I mean, what we legitimately need is what I was kind of happy to see where the Artemis program was headed, of this, how do the commercial entities and the government entity work together?
Yes.
Very well, right? We're starting to see that with the International Space Station. We're going to see it with Commercial Crew this year. But that larger expansion out from low Earth orbit, how does that work?
Yeah.
Because the reality is, and Elon has been very clear about this, the reality is SpaceX would not exist if if they had not won the cargo contract.
Absolutely.
Blue Origin would not be here if we were not talking about this, right?
Seth, Seth in chat, he said he had to explain to his barber that NASA wasn't shut down after Apollo 11.
Wow. Yeah, oh, boy.
Dang.
So, man, if you're listening, I would love the answer to this. Was your answer Apollo 12, 13, 14? Like,
Right. Yeah. You ever heard of
Did you
Tom
ever
Hanks?
Tom
Jim Lovell?
Hanks, yeah.
You said we have a problem.
Yeah. So anyway, like that's where I get nervous about it, right? Because we are not in the era where it can all be handed over to commercial yet. We are not in the era where government can do it all
Right.
either, right? Like it used to be. We are very firmly in that potential transition period where it will become all commercial, right? And that seems to be where NASA really, really, really wants it to go, except for SLS, because SLS is congressionally mandated.
Right.
Right. So
it's like they have to build it, but they
it's all
probably
a massive
know.
political mess.
They probably know
You
that it's not necessary at this point, but they have to build it, and that's such a huge chunk of the budget. What is it per year? Do you know?
I mean, it is. I don't know the specific percentage of what SLS takes up of the budget each year. I will say this, right? If Congress will actually fund the exploration upper stage of SLS, what basically it's a souped up second stage of SLS that gives it the massive throw power, right? The like direct to Jupiter for Europa, well, not direct to Jupiter, but the fast transfer to Jupiter for Europa Clipper, a massive up mass in terms of the tonnage that you can take to the moon.
Right.
That is not equaled by Falcon Heavy or New Glenn. Right. That's where SLS's advantage in terms of the throw power could really come in a single launch.
Yeah.
Now, whatever New Armstrong becomes from Blue Origin,
Right.
massive, super heavy lift, where Starship finally lands in terms of its ability, in terms of its mass to orbit, right? Payload mass to orbit, payload mass to the moon. This is where those things that commercial companies are already thinking of, right, can vastly exceed what the EUS can do. But until they are there, until we know what their actual capabilities are going to be, and of course, we don't actually believe that New Armstrong is anything more than a paper rocket somewhere in the future.
Right,
We
somewhere.
could be totally wrong because Blue Origin really does not communicate a lot of what they're doing. Right.
Yep.
So we could be totally wrong on that.
And
but
it's not
that's
like
where
New Glenn can't get something to the moon.
No, New Glenn can totally get something.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I mean, like, so can Vulcan, so can Atlas, so can Falcon 9, so can Falcon Heavy. This is where all of this complicated muddling of like the emergence of the commercial realm. And I mean, that's just the US commercial realm. I mean, this is discounting what the Japanese rockets can do, what the Russian rockets can do, what the European rockets can do with Ariane 6 and everything coming online here this year as well. I mean, if you really wanted to mobilize an international partnership for the Gateway, you've got dozens of rockets to choose from, my friend.
You got options, boy. You got options. Come on.
But it ultimately boils down to what you want to do and how you want to build it and where you want to take it. And I think that's part of the struggle, right, with NASA being mandated to what Congress wants it to do versus these commercial companies where Blue Origin can surprise us with a launcher. With a lander.
Right.
All of a sudden, where SpaceX can say, well, we were doing this, but that didn't really work out. So now we're going to do this and we're going to tweak it. And that's what we're going to do. Right. And we're just iterating as we go and we're being very public about it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's just the difference between what you can do as a private commercial company and what you can do as a government agency.
Yeah. You can be crazy open or you can not say anything.
Y'all do realize that eventually SpaceX will probably design a lander, right?
Well, Starship is a lander.
Called Starship, yeah.
Well, besides, I mean, like, along the concept of, like, Blue Moon. You know what I mean?
You think I don't know. I feel like they would probably just
Like I know Starship, but like a different kind of concept, like Blue Moon.
like
You
a
know what I
smaller
mean?
one. I just
Yeah,
don't
like a
know.
smaller.
I feel like they're going like they're
And it's so
putting
much
all
on
the chips
par.
in on Starship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
and I mean, I think that the beauty, I mean, honestly, the beauty of Starship, right, is that they're designing it primarily for Mars and that element of
Right.
the architecture, what SpaceX was originally founded for, a couple decades ago, or decade and a half ago. And, but it can also land on the moon.
Yeah.
It can also be Jupiter. It can do all these other things that you can just sort of subtly tweak the design for, right? But you still have the same basic vehicle. And I think that's one of the beauties of its design. I mean, very much like the space shuttle, right? It could be an independent flying laboratory.
Yeah.
It could be a test bed for things. It could be a satellite deployer. It could build a station. It could do all of these various things, all within the confines of it's a winged vehicle with a payload bay and a robot arm.
One of the funny things about Starship is they are probably going to need somebody else to come in there and build a landing pad on the moon, because I think I was listening to the space show, and I think it was with Robert Zubrin, and he was, or maybe it was Zimmerman. There's two Roberts that are on the space show a lot, but they were talking about how if Starship lands just on the moon, like with no landing platform, it's going to send that dust and rocks and everything into orbit around the moon. And then it's going to come right back up and pelt your spaceship whenever it finishes its orbit around the moon.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I think this is one of the last year, NASA announced these partnerships, right? These non-funded partnership studies, right, with a whole bunch of companies.
Right.
They had a few with Blue Origin as well, and they had a couple with SpaceX, and one of them was specifically Starship's effect, right, the Raptor engine's effect on the lunar regolith,
right,
and everything, because they're looking at this, right, knowing
that's going to happen. It's going to send stuff into orbit just from landing.
Yeah, and but I mean, like the cool thing with that is, right, I mean, and how throttleable the Raptors are, is that maybe you could get it to a point where you could throttle that engine because it's 1/6 gravity, right? I mean, that's pittance for Starship, right? Is maybe there's a way that you could throttle these things to an extent that you're not kicking the lunar regolith into orbit.
Yeah, and then once they've done it the first time, and once they've done it the first time, they can go ahead and build their landing platform. And what's nice is there's no atmosphere blowing things around. So once you got your landing platform, you clean it off, and there's nothing, the wind's not going to blow dust onto the landing platform. It's going to be nice and clean every time.
Yeah.
Right. We are now over 2 hours, so let's think about closing this thing out. But I want to know, what is a typical day like for Chris G?
Oh wow!
Like I know that it's like, what's it like? You wake up and you decide, what am I going to report on today? What is it?
In large part, no.
Okay.
In large part, we know what we've got coming up.
You get assignments, or is it like that? Or?
I kind of yes and no. So like we do have assignments for across the team of writers and everything like that. But it's not really like, hey, you do this. It's more like, we know we need to report on this. Who wants it?
Right.
Type thing. Play to everyone's strengths. So I tend to focus more on if something is a breaking story that needs to get out really quick, or interviews with Northrop Grumman and United Launch Alliance and satellite providers and things like that, and turning those around into articles. Usually I know in advance, so it's not like a surprise that morning. But of course, this is spaceflight; things change. You know, I can be happily going along at noon, and all of a sudden, boom, something happens,
Right.
and hopefully it's not a boom boom.
Yeah.
It's
Hopefully it's a good one. Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
Good bada
For
boom.
that, she's passed out on the couch. It's pretty dark, but my dog Starbuck.
For Becca. I mean, come on.
yeah,
For Becca.
Galactica.
Good old
For
Starbucks.
Becca, I'm afraid you have to show her your dog.
Oh, okay. You're gonna have to tell me because I can only see you guys. I can't see like what my camera. But she's over there on the chair. Can you see a dog?
Is it like
There's
black
brown
and white?
Yes.
Black and white. Okay. Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
I think I see paws or something. Yeah.
Yeah. She is normally the every 3 minutes in, out, in, out, in, out, in, out, in, out. And sometimes it's like, baby, I love you, but you gotta pick because I gotta be able to write more than a sentence here. Like I die between, but I love her. She's a cute dog.
I love her too.
But yeah, I mean, there's that element of it. There's balancing that being on podcasts sometimes whenever a launch is going on. I mean, that's the real wild card. I mean, because sometimes it's like, yep, it's 2 a.m. and they're launching from Baikonur, so here we go.
Wait.
And the other part of what I do, which is script writing.
Right.
So,
I was just going to say we didn't get to it.
Between a lot of this, yeah.
Now, you did say that at least one of your scripts, you did make a short film. Do you want to tell us where we can find it?
Yes, it is on. Oh boy, what's the name? I'm horrible. See,
I can at least show it up here on the screen so that like people can know how to find it.
See, like I have all of this space knowledge up here, and then I forget things like important things like where is my film online. I'm going to shoot it to you in a Twitter DM, the link to it. It's on a site called Audience Awards. We actually won a few awards with this film. It's called Avowed. And none of the scripts that I actually write, I mean, for production and stuff like that, are about space. So this story is actually about a nun in training in her novitiate year before she takes final vows, who is tasked with caring for a patient who is so critically disabled, both physically and mentally, that while their body and physical age is that of someone who's in their 30s, they never developed beyond a 2-month-old mentally.
Okay.
And how it kind of shatters her faith a little bit in how could God do this? Like, how could God make a person like this? And it's her own struggle to recognize the humanity in the person that she doesn't choose to see as a person.
Well,
first,
I'll be watching this. I used to be religious myself, and I've struggled with those kinds of questions throughout life and stuff. So that sounds interesting. Yeah. All right, cool. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can just see the address right here. But you can go to theaudienceawards.com, and I assume just search for Avowed.
I'm pretty sure you can, yes.
Yeah, or Google the Audience Awards.
If you Google search Audience Awards Avowed, it'll take you right there.
There you go.
Yeah. Which is exactly what I did when you asked me, where is
Really?
it? No,
Okay.
I know the Audience Awards Avowed. Like, let me Google that real quick.
All right. Well, awesome, man. Dude, this has been so cool. I really appreciate you. Like, when I was first like, man, wouldn't it be cool if we could get Chris G to come on the show? Like, and you're just like, yeah, man, I'll totally do it. That is so cool of you to come and be on this little small fry show. It's been very enlightening. Yeah, you're very knowledgeable, and I really appreciate it. Kegel, you want to? Oh, go ahead. Yeah,
real quick. Hold on. We had to ask, Chris. I told you I was going to ask you on the show. Your favorite Star Trek series?
Oh, Deep Space Nine.
Deep Space Nine. Okay, okay. I could dig that. I grew up on the original and Next Generation myself, but I did watch Deep Space Nine as well, so I give you that one. Right on. That was it. That was the only question.
Anybody else? Anything?
I told Seth I'd ask, so there you go.
All right. Kegel, you want to play us out?
Shutdown sequence initiated. Shutting down.